For 2020, Toyota is giving North America a new Yaris hatchback, but the eagle-eyed in the crowd may notice a few things right away. The first up is that this is not an all-new vehicle per se, because the sedan version of this has been on sale in America for a while. And of course, some of the folks outside North America may be thinking to themselves, hang on a minute, that's not a Yaris. That's because under the skin, this really is a Mazda 2 that has been Toyotified up front. Let's talk about what's going on here. For 2020, both the sedan and hatchback version of the Yaris in North America are made by Mazda in a Mazda factory, and they were designed by Mazda originally. The interior is definitely Mazda, the engine is a Mazda engine, the transmission is a Mazda transmission, etc. Mazda used to sell their subcompact vehicle in North America, but sales were really quite low, and they decided they just couldn't make a go of it anymore. So the Mazda 2 was canceled in the United States back in about 2013. About 3 years later, Toyota decided to license a Mazda 2 sedan for the Scion brand because it had a slightly sportier image, and of course the Mazda 2 was no longer sold in North America, so it wasn't a direct competitor, and thus the Scion IA was born. When Scion was discontinued, that became the Yaris IA, replacing the Yaris sedan, and now for 2020, they've completed the lineup by bringing us the hatchback version of the Yaris, also known as the Mazda 2. There are some purists out there that think that this is a horrible arrangement, but in reality it works well for both Mazda and for Toyota. Toyota has a larger dealer network, they can sell more Yarises. Mazda needs the sales, of course, and they already had a vehicle that was ready to go. As you'd expect, the front-end design is a little bit of Mazda blended with the Toyota look. So we have this sort of angry and very hungry look up front, these angry headlamps and this very hungry grille right there. But the headlamps also have a little bit of Mazda tucked in there, although they've really disguised it quite well. When it comes to active safety, the Yaris does not get Toyota's latest safety packages because, again, at its heart, it is a Mazda. So instead, we get Mazda's low-speed city safety system that includes autonomous braking at lower speeds only. So out on the open highway, if you're going 55 or 60 miles an hour, this collision management system is not going to work the same way as what you find on a Toyota Corolla. And although we have some features on this model that we don't find in more expensive Toyota models, like rain-sensing wipers, we don't find all the same kind of active safety technologies that you will find in something like a Corolla, a RAV4, or a Toyota CHR. At 161.6 inches long, this is almost exactly the same length as the Honda Fit, and it is notably shorter than the Yaris sedan. The subcompact segment, or entry-level segment, however you want to look at it, has definitely been changing over the last few years because we have fewer direct competitors. For instance, the Versa is no longer available in hatchback format. We just get a sedan for 2020, but we have a ton of new sort of competitors, like the Hyundai Venue that is trying to be perhaps a subcompact crossover, even though it's two-wheel drive just like this Yaris, and it's right about the same size. It is a little bit shorter overall. We also have vehicles like the Nissan Kicks, Mazda's own CX-3, which is interestingly enough closely related to this, but definitely a crossover. It has all-wheel drive available. Although General Motors has canceled most of their passenger cars, for 2020 we still have a Chevy Spark and a Chevy Sonic, both of which you could see as a competitor to this. Moving to the rear, again, we definitely get a mixture of styles. These tail lamps certainly scream Mazda, but again, I think the look is overall quite attractive. Then we have a single exhaust tip over there on the passenger side. As you'd expect out of an entry-level vehicle, we have one of the least powerful engines available in the United States for 2020. It's a 1.5-liter four-cylinder engine producing 106 horsepower and 103 pound-feet of torque. There's only one transmission on offer for the hatchback. It's the 6-speed automatic transmission only. You can get a manual transmission in the sedan. Also, as you'd expect out of something this size, fuel economy is excellent. According to the EPA, you should get 35 miles per gallon combined. This is going to be one of the most efficient non-hybrid vehicles available in North America. An interesting bit of trivia is that this is also the only vehicle in North America that I can think of that has Ford, Mazda, and Toyota logos under the hood. That's because some of the drivetrain components date back to when Ford owned Mazda. As you'd expect out of an inexpensive vehicle, we have a manual driver's seat and a manual passenger seat, although the passenger seat doesn't have the height adjustability feature. We do have a nice touch over here, which is a tilt telescopic steering column, something that we don't always find in subcompact cars. When it comes to my overall front seat comfort score, I'm going to give this 9 out of 10 points as far as inexpensive subcompacts go. Space efficiency has been a little bit of a problem in some of Mazda's recent platforms, and of course that applies to the Yaris here as well. A lot of that has to do with the exhaust manifold design. It requires more room under the hood, making the hood itself longer, So for the same overall size vehicle, you have a little bit less interior room. Sitting right here behind myself, with the front seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have about an inch of legroom left. So this is still the kind of vehicle you could put 4 people in very comfortably, but you will find more overall legroom in some of the competition. Although headroom numbers are really not that much different than the Yaris sedan, the rear seat area is definitely more comfortable for taller adults. I can definitely put my head back here against the headrest, and my head is just barely touching the ceiling, but in a more natural seating position, this rear passenger area is definitely very comfortable. Of course, this is a small vehicle, so if I move all the way over to the right side, you'll notice that my knees are definitely digging into this seat right here. And then the headrests are kind of an awkward design right there. You have to put them all the way up. And then they do start hitting me right between the shoulder blades, oddly enough, rather than actually at my head, because they don't really go high enough above that seat back. Let's move over to the middle seat now and see how that is. It's actually pretty roomy right here, and that's because of the more dome-shaped ceiling that we find here. So headroom is still pretty decent. My head does touch the ceiling right back there. If I wanted to put my head against the headrest, I would have to move into a very awkward position, but you could definitely put smaller children here in the middle without a problem. One of the reasons you might want the Yaris hatchback over the Yaris sedan is cargo practicality and cargo room. We find more cargo room back here than the sedan, almost 3 cubic feet more, bringing this up to just under 16 cubic feet total. But it is worth noting that you will find more storage space in something like a Soul or a Honda Fit. And of course, things get even trickier within the Toyota envelope, where you will find a more practical cargo area in something like the Toyota CHR, which is not far off the Yaris in overall pricing. And of course, many of the subcompact crossovers out there will definitely have larger but similarly practical cargo areas. Going in for a closer look, we do find a spare tire right there under the load floor, and you'll notice that the load floor itself is pretty deep down there. It's about 10 inches below the lip. As we see in other vehicles that are rebadged, we really don't find much Toyota in here. All of this really is straight out of the Mazda parts bin. There's no sunroof available in the Yaris at this time. If you want that particular feature, you'll have to work your way up into a more expensive Toyota. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and two-way adjustable headrests. The center sections of the seat back and seat bottom cushions are perforated. This is not real leather, however, this is imitation leather. You can see that we have moderate bolstering on the seat back and seat bottom cushion. Moving over to the door panels, you can see we have blue stitching against those charcoal inserts there, more perforated soft text inserts. We have a soft touch armrest right there, a large bottle holder right down there at the bottom of the door, and overall definitely more premium materials than we find in the average subcompact car. Working our way over to the dashboard, again, absolutely nothing was done to hide the Mazda componentry in here, so we still find the strong line running right across the dashboard, those round air vents right there, and the Mazda Connect infotainment system right here in the dash. This is a 7-inch touchscreen, and as you can see, it supports smartphone integration. They have replaced that with a Toyota logo right there, but you can see that the overall interface bears no resemblance with other Toyota products in North America. It's also worth noting that, as we see in other Mazdas, the touchscreen functionality turns off once you start moving. So if you're out on the open highway, you have to use the controller in the center console. The upper portion of the dashboard is a hard plastic, but we do have a soft touch insert right here with some after stitching. Going down from there, we find a single zone automatic climate control system here, 2 USB inputs down there. The SD card slot to the left is for the optional integrated navigation system, which you can upgrade into. The key is the same sort of candy bar key that we find in the average Mazda out there. We also have a console shifter here with a manual mode over to the left. The shift pattern is a little bit reversed from normal, so we push away from the driver for gear down, pull towards the driver for gear up. We have a sport mode toggle right there, and then the controller for that infotainment system. So this is the power and volume knob here. You rotate the controller around to select options, toggle up, down, side to side, click down to enter, and then we have a few direct access buttons there. This is a very tiny wrist rest, and then we have a pretty standard parking brake. Between the front seats, we find 2 large cup holders, a small storage cubby right back there with no lid, and of course, no center armrest. The instrument cluster features a very large central speedometer and these sort of chrome wings on either side. We have a digital tachometer in this LED display over to the left, and then fuel gauge, exterior temperature, and your trip odometer over here on the right side. Clicking the info button on the steering wheel will cycle through that trip computer, but we don't find the same kind of large color readouts that we find in other Toyota models. On the left side of the wheel, we find infotainment buttons. Track forward, backward, volume up, down. We click in the center for voice command, and in the center for that trip computer change over there on that side. Then we have dedicated phone command buttons right down here, and then controls for regular cruise control over here on the right side. No adaptive cruise control is available. In our acceleration tests, it takes 9.3 seconds to get this vehicle from 0 to 60 with just me in the car, and it took 123 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0. 9.3 seconds may not sound that exciting, but remember that there are a decent number of alternatives out there that are going to be an awful lot slower than this. And this 6-speed automatic transmission certainly feels more engaging than the average CVT. Just over 100 horsepower may not sound like a great deal, but remember the Yaris is not a terribly big car, and this weighs under 2,400 pounds. That light curb weight also plays into the braking score, which is again pretty decent for the subcompact category, even though this model has pretty skinny tires on it. The light curb weight also helps out when it comes to overall handling ability. Now, I'm not telling you that this drives like a Honda Civic out on the road, but it definitely has a more engaging feel than you might expect out of a subcompact car in America. Bearing in mind that the Honda Fit has long been a direct competitor to the Yaris, and it is well known for its handling ability and overall fun-to-drive nature down here in the sub-$20,000 market, it makes an awful lot of sense that Toyota has brought us the Mazda 2. Because Mazda has a reputation as well for producing fun-to-drive vehicles, they don't necessarily grip the road better than some of the other alternatives out there, but they have a good overall feel to them, and that's exactly what we find here. The steering has a nice weight to it, it's fairly accurate, there's just a tiny bit of hint of feedback from the front tires, something that we don't find in that many of the competition. And again, thanks to the light curb weight, grip is definitely good for this segment. As we see in basically any vehicle out there with a short wheelbase, ride quality definitely starts to fall apart a little bit out on a rougher road like the gravel road that we're on here. The ride overall in the Yaris I would best describe as a little bit jittery. It definitely doesn't seem to have the refinement that we find in more expensive vehicles. Again, that's quite logical because of the overall price tag. But I have to say that overall I don't mind the way that the Yaris is tuned. The tricky thing here, of course, is that you may be comparing this to something like Toyota's own CHR, or of course a Toyota Corolla, or something in that next category up, or a category across like a subcompact crossover. And I do think that there are a decent number of subcompact crossovers and other options that have better ride quality. The Nissan Kicks, for instance, does very well out on a rougher road surface when compared against something like this. I also have to say that I'm pretty surprised about the refinement that we find in something like the Rio sedan and Rio Hatchback for the price. Going back to the transmission for a moment, it wasn't that long ago that 4-speed automatic transmissions were the norm in this segment, and now the norm is a continuously variable automatic transmission. There are some manual transmissions tossed in there, an occasional dual clutch depending on exactly what you want to compare this to, but CVTs are definitely the norm. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit more engaging, that's definitely going to be this. When you exit a corner, for instance, as we're going to here in a moment, and you floor it, we get more of a direct response, just as you'd expect out of a 6-speed automatic transmission, and a surprising amount of pep for, again, just over 100 horsepower. On the downside, you do hear a lot of that pep. There could be definitely more sound isolation between us and the engine. You really do get some engine noise in the cabin. And overall road noise is definitely above average. 74.5 decibels is what we clocked in this cabin at 50 miles an hour. On the other hand, fuel economy has been excellent. We've been averaging nearly 37 miles per gallon, 36.9 to be exact, over a week of mixed driving. And this model is rated at 35 mpg according to the EPA combined. That's due to that efficient engine, relatively efficient transmission, and again, the light curb weight overall. Although the bulk of the Yaris isn't exactly new, most of this vehicle has been around in some form or another for about 6 years or so overall in the Mazda family, it definitely still has a good feel to it out on the road. Bearing in mind the very narrow price range of the Yaris, I think this vehicle compares very well, as we're going to talk about in a moment, but it's also worth noting that there are a number of vehicles that are less expensive than this and still very well sorted, and of course a number of vehicles that have excellent driving dynamics and aren't that much more expensive than the Yaris. As with most subcompact vehicles on sale in America, the Yaris is targeting a very cost-conscious shopper. And that's why the price tag is pretty narrow. It starts at $17,750 and only goes up $1,000 to $18,750. On the surface of things, it appears that the sedan is about $2,100 less expensive than the hatchback, but in reality, they're the same price for identical configurations. That's a pretty good deal in the segment because generally speaking, hatchbacks are a little bit more expensive. But the hatchback version of the Yaris does not get the base L trim and it does not have a manual transmission. So when you factor those two things into account, it's the same price as the sedan. And if I were choosing between these two, I would certainly get the hatchback. I think it's really a no-brainer here. It's going to be 10 inches shorter, which means it's going to be easier to park. We get more rear headroom and a bigger cargo area. and a more practical cargo area if you fold those rear seats down. That's one of the reasons that hatchbacks and crossovers are so popular, relatively speaking, is that cargo practicality. With that out of the way, let's dive right into the competition. Obviously, the first and probably most direct competitor outside of the Toyota envelope is going to be the Honda Fit. The Fit starts at $16,190, and the Fit has long been a Yaris direct competitor. But remember, this isn't the same Yaris that we've seen before. This really is a Mazda 2 under the skin. Remember that this generation of the Fit is a little bit less fun than the generation that came before it, so when it comes to fun to drive, I have to give the award to the Yaris. It really is engaging for a small, inexpensive vehicle. The Fit has a lower starting price of $16,190, but keep in mind that model does not have CarPlay and it does not have the automatic transmission. And if you get the automatic transmission in the Fit, you're going to get a CVT, which is not as engaging as the 6-speed that we find in the Yaris. I've said before that Mazda's 6-speed automatic transmission is a little bit of a problem for Mazda in some of their more expensive models, but down here in the Yaris, it's absolutely not a problem. The full Honda Sensing suite of technologies is available in the Fit, and that's something that I wish we saw in the Yaris. We don't get radar adaptive cruise control available in the Yaris for any price, and you will find that in the Honda Fit. But you won't find that until the Fit is more expensive than the Yaris at $19,060. So even though you do get that feature in the Honda, it's going to be more expensive in the Toyota. So I don't think that's a big deal here. If my own money were on the line, I would be pretty torn between these two vehicles, but I might lean a little bit towards the Yaris because of the 6-speed automatic transmission versus the CVT and the overall driving feel. It just is a little bit more engaging, a little bit more fun than the Fit. But the Fit is more practical. So if you're simply looking for the more practical vehicle, then the Fit is going to be an excellent option. I suspect, however, that the Yaris is going to be a little bit less expensive at the Toyota dealer. Even though the price tags are pretty similar, we see a little bit more of a discount going on for the Yaris. Moving along, we have the Kia Rio Hatch, which is relatively fresh compared to the Yaris. Remember that the Yaris hatchback is new, but the basics of the vehicle have been around for some time. The Kia Rio is also quite inexpensive, starting at $16,790. It's well equipped, but there are a few items that you will find standard on the Yaris that you don't find on the Rio Hatch, however. I wouldn't exactly call the Kia more premium feeling on the inside, but it certainly feels fresher compared to what we see in the Yaris just due to the overall design. You won't find things like LED headlamp standard. Forward collision warning is not standard on the Rio either, but comparably equipped, the Rio is going to be a little bit less expensive and it has a much longer warranty. Something that some folks out there might be interested in since, of course, Toyota did not build the engine or transmission in the Yaris. We don't really know how its reliability is going to stack up to something along the lines of, for instance, a Toyota Corolla. I would expect the Yaris to be a little bit less reliable than the Corolla, so if that's at all a concern to you, you may want to look at something like a Rio because of its longer standard warranty. Although I think the real direct competitor from Kia is not the Rio Hatch, it's the Soul. This is probably the toughest competitor because of its boxy practicality and the fact that if you do want a few more options in a small vehicle, you can get them in the Soul. The Soul should be looked at not just as a discount option, that's really where the Rio plays in the Kia lineup. The Soul is more of a value play in a small package. So while it starts at $17,490, which is about the same price starting as the Yaris hatchback, we get more power, 147 horsepower versus 106. We get a lot more room on the inside, the very boxy practicality of the Kia Soul as well. But where the Soul really shines is the ability to add options to it. Kia decided quite some time ago that the Soul was not going to be a soulless penalty box. It was going to have options available. So you can get leather upholstery, you can get ventilated seats, you can get a turbocharged engine, a dual clutch transmission, a lot of options that you just cannot get in something like the Yaris or the Honda Fit or even their own Rio hatchback. But you are going to pay for that, of course, because the Soul will get up to about $30,000 nearly if you get carried away with options. Comparably equipped, it's not going to be too far off the Yaris, but it is going to be more expensive, so you are going to have to pay for that extra style. The next option worth looking at is the Chevy Sonic. It starts just over $20,000, but remember, you're going to get a much better deal on this on the Chevy lot than you are likely to get on the Yaris over there on the Toyota lot. General Motors just has more cash on the hood, generally speaking, and they sell further from MSRP than we see Toyota vehicles on their lots. So in real world situations, you should probably expect about $2,000 off the price tag if you're taking a look at the Chevy website. The Sonic comes across as a decent competitor. It definitely feels peppy and engaging out on the road. I like the way that the Sonic drives, and it has a turbocharged engine standard. The turbo engine is going to make a bigger difference in feel than the numbers would otherwise indicate. It does have more power, notably, almost 140 horsepower versus the 106 that we find in the Yaris, but the way that power is delivered is very different, and therefore it's going to feel more engaging. Although the Sonic isn't exactly fresh, and I do find the infotainment system a little bit dated at this point, it's worth noting that, again, the bulk of the interior in the Yaris isn't exactly a spring chicken either, so there's not too much of a difference in those terms, Sonic to Yaris. Bearing in mind that most subcompact vehicles, and therefore most subcompact vehicle shoppers, are about low sticker price and low monthly payments, our next competitor is a little bit tricky here, and that is the Toyota Corolla Hatchback. The Corolla Hatchback is very well priced. It starts at $20,290 and has a lot of standard equipment on it. But if you want the automatic transmission, that'll set you back $21,390. If you're thinking to yourself, there's not a lot of difference between a $17,750 hatchback and a $21,390 hatchback, then I would say you're probably not the average Yaris shopper. A nearly $4,000 delta between these two vehicles is going to make a pretty significant difference in your monthly payment, so definitely keep that in mind. But that said, if you are looking at the Yaris and you're willing to spend a little bit more, especially if you're looking at the upper end trims of the Yaris, I might just get the Corolla Hatchback instead. We get more power, it's better handling, it's better feeling, and it feels an awful lot newer on the inside and on the outside. I like the front end look definitely better than what we find in the Yaris, and it also is going to feel a little bit more roomy and a little bit more premium. Also is worth noting that it is built by Toyota, not by Mazda, so if you're worried about long-term reliability, it's likely that the Corolla is going to be a little bit more reliable than the Yaris. Of course, you are going to have to be willing to pay about 20% more for your Corolla, and that is the tricky thing about this entire segment, and that's why I didn't include entries like the Nissan Kicks, which is obviously going to be an option here, but it is starting about as high as the Yaris goes, so it's not the most direct competitor. If my money were on the line, the Yaris is definitely an excellent option, but I suspect I might be willing to pay just a little bit more to get the practicality that we see in the Kia Soul. Remember, the Soul is not going to be that much more expensive. It starts a little bit less than the starting price we have on the Yaris. We don't get the automatic transmission, however, that is a manual. By the time you've added the CVT to that model, it's right up there with the Yaris in terms of the top-end trims, but the Soul is going to be more practical. It's also going to have longer warranty, and it's going to be roomier on the inside. That roomy practicality has long been the main selling point for the Soul. In the previous generation, the counterpoint to that was relatively low fuel efficiency as far as mainstream subcompacts go, but the inclusion of a CVT and their new engine families have really improved that for the 2020 Soul, so that's probably where my money would be. An issue with the previous generation Soul was that fuel economy was a little bit below some of the mainline competition, but they've really solved that with their new continuous variable transmission for the 2020 model year. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos so you can see what we're driving this week, over at Instagram, Twitter, all those other social things, and I'll see all of you next week.